of August 2022. I'm Councillor Chris James, Chair of Planning. Just to make you aware that today's meeting is going to be recorded. Please ensure your phones are switched to silent or off for the duration of the meeting. Please ask, if you wish to speak, raise your electronic hand or physical hand, and I'll use the chat function if you're unable to do this. And please remember, when speaking in the chamber, to use the microphones. And so we're not in the chamber. So item 1 on the agenda is Chair's announcements. I can confirm I received apologies from Councillor Heath Davis for today's meeting. I have no other announcements to make. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest for the items on the agenda?
I see no hands raised, Chair, so there's no declarations.
Thank you. So agenda item 3 is minutes of previous meetings, with 2 sets of minutes included in the agenda for approval. 29th of March 2022, which on pages of 5 to 6. These minutes from a meeting actually took place before the election, so only members who were on planning before that can actually approve these minutes. Who were on planning before the election. So I was a planning member, so I'll propose these minutes.
I have seconded, mate.
Thank you, Councillor. The next one, 19th of July 2022, on pages 7 and 8 of the report. Do you have any members have any comments on these? Yes, see no indications. Do I have a proposer and a seconder for these minutes, please?
I move, Chair.
A second. So item 4 on the agenda is requests for site visits. Do we have any requests for site visits?
I see no hands, Chair.
No. Indications. Okay, next on the agenda is agenda item 5, plan application number P2021-0856, Eagle House. I'll hand you over to Chris Davis to give a report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can everyone see the presentation before I start?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay, thanks. So this is application number P2021-0856. It's for the demolition of the existing 2-storey office building and the construction of 18 affordable housing apartments on the upper floors with a 2 office use on the ground floor with associated works and parking at Eagles House, 2 Talbot Road, Talbot. So this is the site location. We've got Talbot Road located to the front with the transport hub interchange here with the train station and the bus station here. Oakwood Lane down the side. You can see the application site edge red in that area and the photograph of the existing building there in the bottom left-hand corner. Plaza Cinema, that's just completed redevelopment, is located to one side with Eagles Mews. And then you've also got the Grand Hotel located on the opposite corner. So that's a bit of a wider location in terms of its location within the central area of Talbot. The existing site is laid out like this. You've got Eagle House located to the front of the site there, and the car parking area to the back. Eagles Mews located, and Oakwood Lane is this highway here. These are some photographs of the existing building on site. As you see, the Grand Hotel in the foreground looking towards the building located over here. And this is the view along Oakwood Lane with the Eagles Mews in the background. The view back up towards Talbot Road. Again, a view from the transport hub looking back towards the site. You can see the Plaza Cinema development in the background here. So this proposal is for a 5-storey, 18 unit, 1 and 2 bed flat development. The ground floor will be A2 office uses. You will note from the plans that these are the typical elevations of the building, and I'll flip between these and the artist's impression of the building. If you notice here, the development has been amended to set back the property. It was originally 5-storey as a block, but it provided setbacks on the upper floors to reflect the relationship with the adjoining buildings. You'll see that this photo montage, in terms of the way that the building is meant to look, that doesn't have the setbacks in it. But if I flick back to the previous one, you'll see how the scheme has been amended since it was originally submitted to reduce the impacts on adjoining properties and to reflect more the street scene and the built form within the area. So it's finished in brick cladding and brick and cladding to match, similar to what's developed on the police station just further up the road. And this is the proposed layout. You've got the building to the front. Here, you've got 19 car parking spaces, 10% of which will have electric charging. We've had no objections from highways in relation to the parking provision. The development will be carbon neutral in operation, and in terms of the design of the properties, be in compliance with Welsh Government's design quality standards for sustainability. The main issues, well, what you'll see is the consultative responses set out within the report, the amendment sheet. Most of these are on page 13 and 14, and we've had additional response that's been provided on the amendment sheet from a neighbour and also from housing strategy being provided on the amendment sheet that you should have with you. In terms of the main issues in relation to this development, one of the main issues is the building of local importance under policy BE2 and the need for housing in this area. So in terms of policy BE2, that sets out that development proposals that would affect buildings that are of a local, historic, architectural or cultural importance will only be permitted where, 1, they can serve or where appropriate enhance the building and its setting, or it is demonstrated the development could not reasonably be accommodated without affecting or replacing the building, and the reasons for development outweigh the heritage importance for the site. So in terms of this, the applicant have set out their justification, and that's set out within the report on pages 18 and 19. You will see from details within that assessment, they've considered the reuse of the building, and you will see how the form of the building and the way it's designed would not be able to accommodate, I think it's more than 3 to 4 units to a standard that would be acceptable under current standards. They've considered whether or not the building can be retained to try and provide further development around the site, but again, that's not been possible. And in terms of the need, the applicants have obviously clarified that they've got the social housing grant funding for the development proposed. You will see from the response from housing strategy, as set out on the amendment sheet, that there are currently 1,295 households waiting for housing in Talbot, and of these, 673 people need 1 and 2 bed properties. So in terms of the assessment that we've set out within the report, we've considered the justification put forward by the applicant and balanced this obviously with the overriding need for further residential development in the area. And we consider that on balance, they've addressed the policy BE2 adequately in order for us to recommend approval today. One of the other main issues on the site was flooding. The applicants have submitted an FCA. In discussion with NRW, further amendments were made to that FCA. This requires a specific slab level for the building and a slight increase in the level at some of the car park area. Whilst they understand that would be a slight increase, and raise issues in terms of potential impacts on third party. They concluded that the changes in level were so negligible that the assessment would not be reasonable to be carried out any further. So in relation to flood risk, there is no impacts on third parties and no risk to the properties in terms of flooding. The conditions are all set out in the report. As you will see, we've also had a Section 106 contribution proposed for £31,920 for open space and play to be spent in the ward of Talbot. The development is also 100% affordable housing. As I said, it's currently in the scheme to get grant funding, but that would be covered off by a condition if that wasn't taken through to the development, because obviously the applicant is not an RSL. So there is a potential risk that the site could be sold on to someone else. So there is a fallback position where they would have to provide 25% affordable housing if that was the case. The other responses of note are probably Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust. They've offered no objection to the development, but suggested a condition in relation to the recording of the building prior to its demolition. We've received a number of objections. These predominantly relate to matters in relation to other developments I've undertaken in the area in terms of noise and disturbance and parking. But as you see, we've set out in the report responses to all of those. And on balance, we think that the proposed development in terms of providing a much needed residential development within the area outweigh the loss of the building of local importance. There are no other fundamental technical objections to the proposal. It is acceptable in terms of overlooking distances, and there are no issues in terms of residential amenity upon any other adjoining properties. So based on the conclusions on the officer report, we're thereby recommending approval subject to the conditions as set out in the report and the Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. So I've got some indications by email of some people, councillors like to speak. Before I go on the ward members, Councillor Percy's indicated he'd like to speak. Councillor Percy, again, the same as with ward members, there'll be no time limit on your speaking time.
Chair, if it's okay, I'm quite happy to follow the ward members. I think it's appropriate they address the committee first, if that's okay.
We'll go that way, that's not a problem. So Councillor Freegar, Councillor Rahman, would you like to speak?
Sharon, would you like me to go first, Sharon?
Yes, that's fine, so.
Chair, is that okay?
That's fine. All right.
Well, thank you, Chair, and can I also thank the planning officers, both Nicola and Chris, for their time in meeting both myself and Sharon at the site and providing relevant information related to this application. Can I also thank you all for allowing both myself and Sharon Freegard, local members, to speak today. Chair, before I go into my two concerns, which I would like to discuss today on this particular application, I would like to point out that I am not against the principle of housing development, nor single-use apartment. I'm fully aware of the local housing needs, and I have a good understanding and relationship with local private and social housing providers. The first one, Chair, that I like to pick up is my concern around which Chris mentioned earlier on is related to building of local importance, planning policy BE2. Port Talbot as a town has lost many significant heritage buildings. Eagle House is significantly older than the Grade 2 listed Plaza building, which the planning officer referred earlier on. Even the Grand Hotel next to the site, as well as the former Lloyd Bank building, which is located close proximity to the site. Eagle House predates the construction of Station Road and Talbot Road, and it is one of the oldest commercial building remaining in Port Talbot since the 1876 map survey was carried out. So this shows how old this particular building is. And in terms of local importance, I don't think Nothing can argue that. The recent refurbishment of the Grade 2 listed Plaza building has shown us how respecting our heritage can be an important part of our local community. Protecting our heritage and architectural character is really important to the residents of Port Talbot. Members, our history and our heritage defines us as a community and who we are. The application acknowledges that the existing building is not suitable for the required units to be built. This does not justify the demolition of such a building. The report presented today does not demonstrate sufficient justification for this, and it's unbalanced in my view. I think the applicant should find an alternative site should they wish to build proposed 18 apartments as mentioned in the plan and have respect for our local heritage. The next point, Chair, I would like to bring up is visual amenity. The height of this proposed new development will most certainly overshadow the existing residential properties in Eagle Mews. There is no need for this new development to be built at such height. And the only reason I can see to justify the height is to build more units by the applicant. This is, in my view, is totally going against the planning principle of good design. Mr. Chairman, I would urge the committee today to take in consideration of both mine and my colleagues' concerns and views and refuse the application in front of you today. Can I thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak on behalf of not just my local constituent, but people of this town. Thank you, Chair. I have nothing furthermore to add.
Great, thank you, Councillor Rahman. Do any officers want to respond to what Councillor Rahman's raised?
Yeah, I can come in there if you wish. Just taking the 2 points in reverse, really. In terms of design and issues in terms of overbearing and impact on residential amenity, obviously you'll see set out in the report that the case officer is undertaking an assessment of those issues and this scheme hasn't been amended to address some of those concerns as part of the process. So in terms of our guidelines and policies, it would all be within acceptable limits. And we think that the changes that have been made to the building improve the scheme since it was originally submitted to address some of those issues in terms of how it fits in with the wider character of the area. Turning to the building of local importance, as you see, it is a matter of judgment, and obviously in terms of planning, we have to weigh up the significant need for housing within that area. As I pointed out earlier, housing strategy have informed us there's 1,295 households looking for housing in Port Talbot, and of these 673 are looking for 1-bed and 2-bed units. The issue in terms of the applicant, obviously they've submitted the application for this site. It's obviously up to them to consider what sites they put forward for development, and obviously not all sites are up for sale for development opportunities. And obviously Port Talbot is a very densely built up ward, and there are no vacant plots for development, so we are going to see more redevelopment of sites to provide more housing within the central locations coming forward. You know, there are not many vacant sites, as we see with our issue in terms of open space and play provision within the area. There's not many opportunities in order to provide this. So obviously noting the local members' concerns, but in terms of the weight that we've afforded the impacts of the loss of the building, our view is that the overriding need for housing generally within Neath Port Talbot and within this particular area mean that we think that it would be in compliance with policy B2 in this case.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Freegard.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to echo Councillor Rahman's comments. Thanks for allowing us to speak today. I'd like to reiterate some of Councillor Raman's points, which I totally agree with. And I'd like to pick up on some comments from Chris Davis, if that's possible. The first thing I'd like to say is obviously the council had the foresight to actually designate this building as a building of importance. And they put it in the local development plan of 2011 to 2026. And the title of that is the Historic Environment Supplementary Planning Guidance and for buildings of local importance. And I looked on that, and there are buildings throughout the borough, probably in everybody's ward. And I think when I looked at all the buildings, it was really, really important to see the mix and the variety, the age, the historic context and the features of the architecture and things right across the borough. And as my colleague said, we have destroyed so many significant buildings in Talbot, which may not be of national importance. They may not have been Grade 2 listed, but as I said, not of national importance, but certainly of local importance to us, the people who live here, the people who visit here. And it's really important that we don't destroy, if at all possible, any more of our valuable, important structures. I mean, this building is very old and rare, built in the 1860s, and it was one of the first buildings in the locality in the whole development of Talbot. And we can't just discard these things. These were here before us. We can't just discard them. We need to realise the importance and to be able to tell the generations coming through what they were used for, how they were built, and all the connotations to do with that. And I'm sure Councillor Percy will talk a lot more about the historic value of this building. On the weekend, I happened to go to St Theodore's, which we were celebrating 125 years. Emily Talbot built the St Theodore's and gifted us the building. And I'm sure that, and I may be wrong, I know Rhys Roderick built Eagle House, but I think it may have been Emily Talbot that gifted the building to us. And I'm sure, as I said, Councillor Percy will go into the historic context of that building. As my colleague said, we're looking at a 5-storey elevation here, and it's right on the junction. Now, I can see from the photos and the way it was portrayed, it does look like it's quite a big junction, but it's not. We've got the train station within yards of the development. Closer to that is the bus station, the new hub. And something that Chris missed out was the taxi rank. We've also got the taxi rank with a little slim lane in that hub, which is directly adjacent to the building. Now, at the side of the building, when he showed the side, what would be the side elevation and the parking, it again looks as if it's quite a wide road, but it's not. You can get 2 cars at the end there, but as you go down, and I'm talking about perhaps 20 yards in, the road narrows so much that it's really dangerous for one car going down the lane. Now, down the lane there, because it is a lane, it's Oakwood Lane, it leads directly to the car park of the Grand and the mosque. Now, I can see that Chris picked up that there were no issues coming from highways, but I wondered where the feasibility study was. Because we've got the junction there going onto the main road, onto the A48, and we've got the Oakwood Lane. So where's the feasibility study for any issues there? Because the concern is you've got the Grand, the mosque, and also directly behind, directly a neighbour to Eagle House is the care home. So I think we need to look a little bit more at the highway situation there and the parking, because clearly this is going to cause problem, or could cause problems, or maybe not. But where's the feasibility study? Because not only will the elevation and the building, the it is imposing. So does that have an effect on highways, and also the traffic, and how is it going to be changed there? Because the extra traffic simply can't fit in. That infrastructure wasn't built for this. So I would ask where that is, and perhaps officers do have more detail on that I would be grateful if they could give us that. In terms of the flooding, we had issues last year. Customs House was flooded there. We have issues with flooding in that area. So to say that it's not going to make any difference there, I would question that and would like a little bit more detail in that as well. Because initially, I think it was a floodplain, and the maps changed, didn't they, within the last couple of years, just before the prison. But I think that was a floodplain. So obviously officers will know a little bit more about that than I do. So going back to one of the points that Chris made about being sold on, I know that there were a lot of people were interested in that building because they liked the facade. They actually appreciated the history and the features of the building, and they were talking about making it into like a big boutique hotel. So I don't think that that you're saying that it can't be made into anything else really suffices, because there could be housing in there. It may not be as much as what the 5-story would hold, but it could be done in a different way to accommodate the historic features of this building and to keep the history in the borough. And I think that's so important because, okay, we had the foresight to put it on the plan, and now we can give all the reasons and the needs. We can give the needs of why we can now demolish it, but we can also give the needs of why we should keep it. And I really hope that you will take all these things into consideration, because there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't be reviewed and done in a different way, and we have both. And that it is safe, because obviously I really think that the highways is an issue on this particular building. And I think that's all my points at the moment. And obviously there's SHDG funding in this, and we need to make sure that we've done the best for everybody's needs, and local people really appreciate that building. And I did wonder as well whether or not the care home, the mosque, and everybody was included in the consultation. The other facilities and the organisations that would be affected, did they have a letter in which that they knew exactly what was going on and whether or not they would object or not? Because I know a lot of people have said that they haven't received anything, and I know that we've complied and put things on railings, but people don't tend to look at railings to see for the notices and things like that. And this is so important to the people of Talbot. And as I said, if we can do this on one building that we've designated in the LDP, we can do it on any building. So what's the point of having the LDP? So please reconsider this and look at it with fresh eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Freegard. Hope we took some notes there, Chris. You got some responses there?
Yeah, in terms of consultation, obviously, as you alluded to, we have a consultation policy. We consult adjoining neighbours by letter. We advertise in the press as necessary and as site notices. And obviously we do not depart from that because that's where we get into difficulties, where we do different things for different applications. So in terms of this, we've undertaken our consultation procedures in accordance with our requirements and our standard process. In terms of flooding, obviously, as you see set out in the report, the applicants did submit the flood consequence assessment, which has been assessed in line with TAN 15. As you say, the site is going in terms of slab level and the levels of the car park. That's set out within the report. Clearly, it is in an area, it's in a C1 flood zone presently, And obviously NRW are satisfied that the applicants have done sufficient work on that to address the impacts in terms of flooding. That doesn't mean that the site will never flood in the future. It just means that obviously they've addressed the matters in terms of potential impacts on other properties and the site itself, and protecting residents in the new development as part of that application. In terms of parking and highways, obviously the highway section have considered the application. It's not of a scale that would require any kind of transport assessment to be submitted with it. The car parking proposed and the access is considered to be acceptable. In terms of its location, obviously, as you pointed out, it's in a very sustainable location in terms of access to services and other modes of transport. You've got taxis, buses, trains and everything else. So obviously, as far as highways are concerned, there's no justification for any recommendation of refusal based on traffic to the property. It will have sufficient parking within the site to accommodate for residents. And again, turning just to the building of local importance, you know, the policy does set out that the proposed development can outweigh the heritage importance of the site. And obviously we've tried to balance within the report the overriding need for housing in the authority as a whole, and the impacts on the site and the loss of the building. And obviously the conclusion of that is that we're recommending approval based on our consideration of the balance. I don't know if Kerry wanted to come in there.
I'm happy to come in at this point, Chair, but did Councillor Friga want to come in to a point, or do you want me to just echo Chris' comments, really?
Sorry, go on, Councillor Friga, you did have your hand up first. Do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really concerned about that. I would ask, has the committee actually been on a site visit here? Because we're talking about not just the junction, it's on a bend. It's on a very narrow bend, that junction. Just in front of the junction, we've got a crossing. So there were no plans to put lights here to have the extra traffic come in and out of that area. And we're talking about almost approximately 20 cars. I think it was 19. So there are no plans, as I could see, for any lights there. And I really, really think this is a very dangerous area. It's a very, very busy area because we've got all those facilities in a very small pocket. I can see on the pictures how it may look as if it's further apart than it is. So I really think that we need to have more concrete detail from, I wasn't talking about the parking per se, Chris. I was talking about the extra vehicular coming out of that thing here. So you've got the junction. Where's the junction?
I just thought I'd share this plan again, just for everyone to see. Obviously, what you can see is that obviously the area that they're proposing for car parking is already used as a car park. So in terms of the development, obviously that's the existing layout plan. You will see that this is already a car park.
Chris, if you've been there, Chris, it's really dangerous at the moment with the amount of vehicles that are there. With the extra vehicles, it's going to cause even more chaos there. But I'm talking about it coming out onto here, coming out onto the main road here. You've got you've got a crossing here. You come straight. You're not showing the other bit around here, where you come around the train station. Now that's quite a steep bend, and you're talking about all this extra traffic coming out onto the A48 there. So I really think that if people haven't been on a site visit there, you need to go and just check that the highway situation is as they're saying it's going to be. But I would certainly like more detail on that. I would have thought a feasibility study would need to be done.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of highways, obviously they look at what the existing use and the existing access there. There is a slight betterment in terms of providing a footway along there. I think that in terms of the existing use of the property, there's obviously traffic generation from that. I understand it's currently split into about 5 or 6 smaller kind of business units, which will have a resultant parking need and traffic generation themselves. Obviously, there's different in terms of the peak times of traffic for businesses compared to residential properties, there's a slight difference. But in terms of the wider layout, there are no changes proposed under this application. So it's basically the use of a car park for a different use on the site. So it's more residential rather than commercial, but it is still, but there is still an access there, and there is still a car park there. So it's not creating a new access or new car parking area. It's just changing the use of the site and the car park.
I agree it's changing the use, but it was never intended to be 5-storey for flats there. So it was just for the solicitor. There's a solicitor's office which got a car park at the back, and the Grand which has got a small car park at the back. But the lane is really, really narrow. You've only got the two bits. You can only get 2 cars right at the end by the junction. So I really don't understand why there's not something in writing from Highways to show us how it's going to work with the extra traffic.
I'm going to let Kerry come in now. Kerry.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, Nicola Lake has just put a hand up, so I don't know whether Nikki wants to come in and address the sort of the highways issue. I was going to sort of bring in more general points around the buildings of local importance and sort of the need argument. So Nikki, if your point is about highways, perhaps it's best if you come in at this point.
Great speak, Nicola, if you bit about highways.
Yes, so I've got some more information about the highways. So as Chris has already said, the car park is remaining pretty much as it is at present. And that has obviously served the building's historic uses for a number of years. But what has changed recently in this area, as many people know, is that the road layout through the transport hub development has changed quite significantly in this locality. Previous to that, the junction onto Oakwood Lane was actually traffic light controlled, and those traffic lights have only been recently removed as part of the redevelopment of the road layout, and that junction has now been improved quite significantly with a 2-way access point onto Talbot Road. And so it has been designed very much with the current road layout has been designed very much in mind with the car park of this size in this location with the road layout, and Highways have been consulted on the application, and they have raised no objection to the development subject to the conditions that are on the planning application, including the requirement for the pavement to be created, which isn't there at the moment, plus also a boundary wall to be put in place to make sure that the traffic entering and leaving this site has to use the existing accessway as they do at the moment. And for that reason, the Highways officers have raised no objection to the proposed development, taking into consideration the road layout, the proposed use, and also the existing other uses that are in that location at the moment. I hope that helps to clarify the situation with regard to the Highways comments.
Not really, Nicola, because you're making it sound like the car park is already there for 18, 19 spaces, which it isn't. That there is very limited traffic that goes down there, and unless you actually visit the site, you can't really see the serious and significant problems that could come with this.
And just to clarify again, that it's the same car park, the same number of cars are required for this development as been historically there. It's the same number of cars entering and leaving as what's historically been able to use that car park and that junction. The only difference is that the road layout in this area has been improved. The previous light control junction has been widened. The lights have been removed because of the improvements to that junction and the road layout.
Kerry, come in now about the historical
Yeah,
stuff.
Thank you, Chair. It was just, I mean, I was going to make a couple of more broader points around the buildings of local importance issue sort of versus the need issue, and the local ward members have quite rightly raised and drawn attention to the buildings of local importance policy. But of course, that is just one policy in the LDP. I mean, the LDP, we've always said the LDP needs to be read as a whole. It covers housing need, it covers a full range of elements. And I think the key point perhaps to raise in this issue, in respect of the need, Port Talbot is, members will be aware that Port Talbot as a town centre is highly constrained. I think Councillor Rahman sort of raised the issue about sort of potentially looking at alternative sites. Now, there are quite a limited number of opportunities. I think Chris has already sort of covered this in one of his responses to the questions. There are limited opportunities, particularly within the town centres, particularly within Port Talbot, that are available, vacant and developable. So as we move forward, there's going to be more and more of these opportunities where there are redevelopment sites or windfall sites, as we call them, sort of essentially coming forward. And what we also perhaps need to sort of emphasize for members is, particularly within town centres, we do need to look at higher density developments, because land is a finite resource, particularly in highly constrained settlements. We need to be sort of maximising the opportunities that we get when these potential development sites come forward. Now, going back to the buildings of local importance policy, it has been written in such a way that it does need to be demonstrated. Developers, applicants, they do need to demonstrate the evidence that would need to be provided, so that a full assessment can be sort of made in terms of whether the need, or indeed any other issue, outweighs that building of local importance. Because planning is all about balance. Balancing. You will never have an application that will have all positive impacts. There will be some negative impacts in certain areas when developments come forward. So it's just to make those broad points, Chair, about sort of those sort of wider issues in terms of the highly constrained nature of the location. And as I said, on this particular occasion, whilst myself and officers entirely acknowledge the points that have been raised in terms of the buildings of local importance, I think on this particular issue, I think the evidence that has been presented as part of the application, the assessment that officers have made has informed ultimately the recommendation on this particular occasion, which is approval with conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry.
Chair, could I just ask Mr. Morris one question?
One question. That's it.
So, Mr. Morris, what you're saying then is, whatever the need is in terms of housing, it's going to supersede any historical need that we have as a borough or a council, no matter what. That's what you've just said. Is that right?
No, that's not necessarily what I sort of meant to say or inferred. I mean, as I say, every application, every case needs to be judged on its own merits. I think that's probably sort of the most appropriate response to the question. And as I said, on this particular occasion, with the evidence that has been provided as part of the application, and given the circumstances around the development of the particular site and indeed the location, as I've just touched upon, that is why the officer recommendation is as written today. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Percy. So I can see Councillor Phillips indicated. It's okay if Councillor Percy goes first. He's already indicated. I'll open it up.
I just wanted to come in specifically on the highways issue, if I may, before Councillor Percy, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just two things. Firstly, the car park, they're saying it's the same. We've been saying it's the same size, but is the car park not expanding due to the demolition of the former public toilet building? Are there not an increased number of spaces in the car park? And secondly, on the road layout issue, because it's changed so significantly, I would have expected to see some sort of assessment of that, because where we used to have a straight road with a set of traffic lights for that junction, we now have very sharp bends right next to a bus station with the taxi rank junction. Because of the sharpness of the bend, longer vehicles often swinging out around the junction and no traffic lights. And it just seems to me that I'm struggling to see why they're saying the new road layout is such a vast improvement over the old road layout that they don't need to assess, whether this will have any impact. That was all what I wanted to ask, Chair. Thank you.
Chris, would that be you or Nick? Would that be the best to answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. Obviously, the changes to the interchange and the junctions and everything else were undertaken prior to this application, and obviously they assessed the situation as it is at the time when all that was done. So obviously, under that piece of work, so it's a large infrastructure project, there was assessment made on all the junctions, and obviously, as Nicola pointed out, they take account of development that's already serving off that junction. So the junction improvements were made, taking account of what was there at the time. So knowing that there was a car park and an access in the location where it was proposed. Obviously, there will be a slight difference in terms of the car park, but what the car park does provide is spaces to current standards with 10% electric charging spaces for cars within that area. So in terms of the numbers, it's probably around about the same type of use, because obviously there'll be a slight improvement due to buildings being removed, but obviously the current standards for car parking spaces are slightly bigger, plus with the electric charging spaces and disabled spaces that are going in there. So, but in terms of the wider network, obviously all of that piece of work was undertaken prior to this application, and that just takes account of all the other junctions that feed onto it. So it's not that this development has to reconsider that. This was obviously undertaken as part of that bit larger piece of work. What this does is just consider the use of the site and the car parking proposed for it, because as I said, the access and the location, apart from some slight improvements, as Nicola pointed out, to provide the footway and the means of enclosure to make sure the vehicles are entering and leaving safely, there is no significant change in the use of the car park in terms of traffic generation back and forth to that area, because there is still roughly the same amount of car parking in that location.
Yes. Councillor Thomas, got a question at this point, or is it going to be when I have to have the members?
I was quite happy to wait for Sean to make his points. He was first. So.
Quite a while now. Thank you, Councillor Percy. Sean, if you'd like to.
For our members, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come to speak today. I'm afraid that I will speak for a little while, but please bear with me. I've got what I would consider some quite important issues to raise this morning. I know you've listened to people talk now for about 50 minutes, but yeah, please bear with me. So yeah, I'm going to speak about Eagle House today, obviously not as a local member. I'm a member for Sandfleas East, but a councillor with some interest and knowledge in the historic environment. And I have some significant concerns about this application and the level of consideration given to the historic environment. And I feel that's the critical issue for members to consider today. I know local members have raised some other things as well, but I think this is the critical issue. So to begin with, I don't really feel the document submitted by the applicant or the report in front of you today gives due consideration to technical advice note or TAN 24, the historic environment, or the relevant sections of Planning Policy Wales 11. Now, both of these are Welsh Government documents and are material to the consideration of this application. However, reference to TAN 24 is missing from the officer's report in front of you today. So in brief, in relation to those policies, no assessment of the significance of this historic asset has taken place, and therefore I don't believe it's possible to weigh up the loss of the asset against the benefits of this proposed development. So to give a bit of background, TAN 24 includes locally listed buildings or buildings of local importance within its definition of a historic asset. So that includes Eagle House. And TAN 24 states it's important for those responsible to understand the heritage values and assess the significance of the historic assets that will be affected. There are 4 heritage values which need to be understood before the significance can be assessed. And TAN 24 then sets out what those four heritage values are, which is evidential value, which talks about how the surviving fabric of the building demonstrates how it was built, how it was used, and how it's changed. And you can use photographs and documentary evidence to sort of bolster that as well. Historical value, so that's how the building highlights aspects of the past, how society, lifestyles have changed, its associations with notable people, events and movements. Aesthetic value, which has already been talked about today, which is how the building looks, its craftsmanship, its choice of materials, its distinctive form, perhaps in comparison to other buildings in the vicinity. And then communal value, which is how the building is valued by those who have memories or associations with it. So These four values need to be considered when assessing the significance of a historic asset. And only a brief mention has been made of aesthetic value in the planning documents, where sort of a mention is made of the building's perhaps idiosyncratic siting and scale compared to some of the other buildings. However, this is the applicant attempts to sort of paint this as a negative aspect of the development rather than an important part of its historic character. So, as detailed in TAN 24, I believe a heritage impact assessment should be undertaken, and in TAN 24, it says that they should include sufficient information to enable both the significance of the asset and the impact of change to be understood. So, with the absence of an impact assessment, and very little information relating to the building's significance included in the planning documents or the report, I don't see how members are able to make a legitimate decision today to approve this application. So I would ask members and officers to consider, in light of that, are you aware of the story of the building, when it was built, why, by whom, the uses it's had over the years, its distinctive contribution to the story of Port Talbot, its association with key local figures and national social movement? It's not possible to weigh those up in the planning balance against the perceived need for the development if the value is not known, and there's nothing included in these reports today to give any substance to the heritage value. So I'm just going to read also a brief line from Planning Policy Wales 11, which is sort of sums up the historic environment issue quite nicely. And it says the planning system must take into account the Welsh Government's objectives to protect, conserve, promote and enhance the historic environment as a resource for the general well-being of present and future generations. The historic environment is a finite and non-renewable and shared resource and a vital and integral part of the historical and cultural identity of Wales. It contributes to the economic vitality and culture, civic pride, local distinctiveness and quality of Welsh life. The historic environment can only be maintained as a resource for future generations if the historic assets are protected and conserved. And then it goes on to mention the published conservation principles highlight the need to base decisions on an understanding of the impact a proposal may have on the significance of the asset. So I'm just going to now zero in on our local policy, which is BE2, because that's been discussed as well this morning, which is our local policy for buildings of local importance. Now that sits under that wider sort of context of national planning policy. And within that, a case has been made by the applicant as to how their proposal complies with this policy, but I've got concerns relating to the justifications that are used, and if these are accepted by members today, I feel they would undermine the policy, and this highlights in part what Councillor Freegard mentioned earlier. So the justification before you today is that the development cannot be reasonably accommodated without affecting or replacing the building, and the reasons for the development outweigh the heritage importance. Now, I don't agree with the fact that just because the developer wishes to build more units than can be accommodated on this site, that is a compelling reason in itself to justify the demolition. Now, in all cases relating to all buildings of local importance across all wards in Neath Talbot, it would be possible for a developer to put forward a scheme that is larger than could be accommodated by converting the existing building. So in itself, that is not a compelling reason, else the policy would always be met by a larger scale development, and that is clearly not within the spirit or intention of the policy. In my view, to pass the test within the spirit of the policy, the developer needs to justify why this scale of development is needed and why it is needed specifically on this site. So the documentation, in my view, fails to do this. It gives some vague references to the LDP and housing delivery, and also makes references to sites elsewhere with flooding constraints, which I thought was quite strange, considering this site has the same flooding constraints which have been overcome by design. So yes, we have a lot of sites with constraints in Neath Talbot, but with design, these can be overcome with the right will. And obviously, I also accept there's a housing demand in Neath Talbot. I'm a member in Sandfields, and we do have housing pressures. But what I don't accept is there's a specific demand that is at this site that cannot be met on other windfall sites within settlement limits in the Port Talbot spatial area, or indeed on other allocated sites which remain undeveloped in the plan, of which there are still several in the Port Talbot area. So just briefly on windfall sites, there are within a few hundred metres of this site 2 large vacant buildings, Dyffryn Lower School and Huddersfield buildings, which could contribute to housing demand through conversion. 500 metres away in the town centre, planning's recently been granted for conversion of an office block into accommodation. And obviously, as I've mentioned, in the wider spatial area of Port Talbot, there are many more sites like this. So also included in the justification, and I acknowledge that there's an amendment sheet that's been submitted, but in terms of the applicant's documentation rather than information provided by our officers, quotes have been taken from the LDP in relation to housing delivery and housing demand, and I don't feel that's entirely appropriate, given that the LDP review report now has acknowledged that that growth level in the LDP is undeliverable. And needs to be revised down. So I don't really feel it's appropriate to use those figures or for the applicant to have put forward those figures. And in relation to the figures in the amendment sheet, which Chris mentioned in terms of housing demand, it's important for members to consider that relates to the Port Talbot spatial area, not to this particular ward. This is the spatial area of Port Talbot, much of which is urbanised, and there are many sites across the area of Port Talbot where these housing units can be accommodated. In terms of needs specific to this location, it is obviously important to acknowledge that there have been a lot of housing developments in recent years, actually, of 1 and 2 bed flats within very close proximity to this site, which is one of the reasons I don't believe there's a specific need at this particular location. So you've got Oriel in the town centre, T Rosaf, the former police station, Customs House, which is only a few doors down, Penderyn House and Station Road, smaller developments at Evelyn Terrace, mixed sites at Glenavon and Green Park. So in light of all this, I would really urge members, at the very least, to call for this application to be deferred, as I don't feel sufficient information has been provided to make a judgment and weigh up the issues against the historic environment. Or if officers wish for it to be determined today that members refuse the application on the basis of non-compliance with policy BE2 and TAN 24. Now, Chair, I've spoken enough for the time being. However, should members wish to know a bit more about the building and its local context and its history, I'm happy to share some of that perhaps later in the meeting if members so wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Chris, like to respond to Councillor Percy?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the planning policy, obviously the applicant has set out his justification as part of that to address that policy. I think the officers did go back to the applicants asking for more information to make that more robust, which they have. Obviously, as pointed out by Kerry previously, what we have to do is obviously balance all of the relevant policies within the development plan, and that includes the need for housing across the borough. And as we pointed out, the information that we've received in terms of housing strategy and the need for housing generally in the area is that there is an overriding demand. And I think on balance, in terms of that information, of the officer recommendation is that sufficient information was provided and that there is this overriding need in terms of 1 and 2 bed units generally across the borough, which I accept is not particularly at this specific location, but it's generally across the borough as a whole. But there is, a demand for, over 1,000 units, of which 673 are for 1 and 2 bed units. And obviously this is in a sustainable location within a town centre, which 1 and 2 bed units at a high density would be acceptable. In terms of the issue about alternative sites and flooding, obviously this is in a zone C1 flood zone, so it's not the worst flood zone you can be in. There are sites where it wouldn't even reach this point in terms of residential development. It's not about providing mitigation in terms of raising levels slightly. It's basically a non-starter for residential development in certain areas under Zone C2. So in terms of certain areas, whilst, you know, I accept that there are sites you can do things with, there are certain sites that basically preclude us even opening up a conversation on those sites for residential development. So we are very limited in what we can do. In terms of alternative sites, as members are always aware, we're constantly undertaking pre-app and discussions on other sites within the area, including within this ward. There are other sites, but in terms of the developments coming forward, we are in no way meeting the needs for housing within Neath Talbot under the current needs, notwithstanding emerging needs under the local development plan. Obviously, what comes out under the replacement development plan of needs, we are yet to know, but in terms of just current need for housing, we're significantly under providing the number of units we need to provide within the borough as a whole at the moment, based on, you know, current waiting lists and current demand. Thanks, Chair.
Your hand up. Councillor Percy, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'd like to make two brief responses to that, really. I think one is in relation to housing demand, which I think, you know, I've been a member for 5 years now, and other members have been around a lot longer than I have. You know, housing demand is very much a sort of baseline issue now. This isn't a new issue. This isn't a particular problem that has appeared at the moment. So this is a kind of baseline issue that our policies need to be judged against. And I think we do need to be very careful that the fact there is housing demand does not undermine our other policies. And I think that's one of the points that I'm really trying to drive home here is, yes, there's housing demand, but that shouldn't undermine this policy in itself. Now, the other point in relation to what Chris has said, and yes, officers asked for additional information in relation to justification of policy BE2. I don't know if members have actually read this in the planning application, but there's a 4-page document on the planning document for this, and it makes no reference whatsoever to the heritage contribution of the asset at all. It's full of justification as to why the development is needed, but it does not weigh that up against the heritage value of the site whatsoever. And that is the point. That was 5 minutes of my speech. Is that actually that's not been done. In this planning process, neither the applicant or the officers have actually assessed what value this building is contributing, what heritage value it's contributing. So it cannot be weighed up. You cannot weigh something up against something that doesn't exist. And I think that is the fundamental problem with this application that's in front of you today, members. Thank you.
Kerry, you want to respond to that? And actually,
yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just to make a general point about the LDP review. Councillor Percy referenced the review report, which members will be aware, of course, that the LDP review starts. It's just a point of clarification, really. It is entirely appropriate for applicants of this development, or indeed any other, to quote current LDP policies and growth scenarios, because until the LDP review, until the replacement plan is adopted, it will not supersede the current development plan. So it is entirely appropriate for applicants, and indeed us as officers and members of the planning committee, to assess developments against the current LDP. It's just a point of clarity, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. I can see indications at the moment from Councillor Thomas and Councillor Phillips. What I'm going to do, I'm going to open it up. So if any members have got any questions for officers at all, please raise your hands. Start with Councillor Thomas.
Hi, so I've got a few quick questions. So first of all, there was mention that the applicants don't actually own the entire site. Has that been resolved?
Yeah, the applicant amended the application site boundary to address issues in terms of ownership, and they've now served the relevant certificates.
Brilliant. So the cladding that's proposed, I'm sure we're all familiar with recent issues with cladding. Is this safe cladding? Are there any risks with it?
Matters in terms of construction are obviously dealt with by building regulations. It's similar in terms of cladding, in terms of design, and that's used on the police station just further up the road. But in terms of, you know, building safety and things like that, fire safety, those are dealt with under building regulations.
Okay, so and kind of linked to that then, so is there any way, like if this does go ahead, is there any way to make the building more in keeping with the existing ones? Because I appreciate it's in keeping with the police station up the road, but I mean, it does look very different to the building that it would be replacing it. And with stone cladding, you can obviously emulate what we've got now.
I think that the building obviously tries to reflect some of the features within the plaza with the round elevation to the corner. I think it would be a little pastiche and to try and build a building of that scale in a fashion that tried to resemble the building. I think in terms of the loss of the building, the Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust have offered no objection, subject to a recording of the building, so it's a historic recording process of the building. And I think if you note the conditions, there's a condition there that some of the stone used in the building is reused to build a boundary wall to the car park.
Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the B2 situation. If we're being asked to approve the demolition of an existing building of historical significance, I'd expect to see a sort of detailed and specific and quantifiable case for that, with an assessment of the existing building, its historical significance, and a full assessment of what uses the existing building could be put to before we get to the point of demolition. And having read through both the case put by the officers and the stuff, the 4-page document submitted by the developers, I'm struggling to see where that is. There is no assessment of the building at all and its significance. There's not really an assessment of what the building could be used for beyond saying, well, it would only make, we could only put in 3 or 4 residential units. Well, is it 3 or is it 4? You know, there doesn't seem to have been any design work over that. There's no assessment of the condition of the existing building. There are things in there about, well, we might have to do this and that might be expensive, but there's no sort of quantifiable, you know, costings. You know, this would be prohibitive because of whatever in there. There's no assessment of, I mean, this is being looked at as a sort of mixed development with an commercial office unit downstairs. Well, with the overriding need for housing, could the commercial space in the existing unit all be created to residential? Is that something that, you know, we could be looking at to approve? But again, there's no discussion of that. How many units there would be if the whole thing was converted to residential, given that the neighbouring building is all residential already anyway. It just seems to me that we're very light on the details I would expect to see if I'm going to be asked to make a decision as to whether we should be allowing a historic building to be demolished, because if we get that wrong, we can't undemolish it. So, you know, I'm struggling to see where the justification is for doing that.
Right, Councillor Phillips. Any response to that at all?
It's just to reiterate, obviously the information provided by the applicant is set out within the report. As I said, we've tried to balance that in terms of the need for housing in the area. Obviously, the applicant is considering residential because that is the use that they want to try and get on the site. So they're comparing like for like. They're obviously comparing what they can achieve with a new development compared to what's in the existing building rather than alternative uses. I think they've explored what they can do with the building to try and give us evidence of, you know, what could be provided and within that existing structure. And I think obviously they've reiterated why, because of the design and the shape of the roof, etc., the limited amount of development they can provide in there. But clearly they have a viability issue in terms of how many units they're going to provide. And I think it goes back to the, you know, the need for high density development in sustainable locations within town centres. So I think that obviously is the thrust of the argument that's been put forward, is obviously to deliver the numbers that they need to make this a viable proposition at this location. Obviously the reuse of the building for that purpose and trying to extend or provide additional development on that site would not be feasible.
Councillor Patterson? Yeah. And up there.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to get back to basics here and look at the application that is before us, not one that may come in the future or possibilities of. This is the application that is before us today. I think local members have been very eloquent, and Councillor Percy, previous Vice Chair, very eloquent about historical buildings and the need to record them for posterity. But looking at the planning history of this site, there hasn't been anything approaching an application since 2012. So we're going back 10 years. And the site, you know, if you look at the site, it was it's not something that developers seem to be interested in at all. Maybe it is because of the historical interest in that building, sorry. I don't know why other applications haven't been coming forward, but the fact of the matter, they haven't. The one that is before us today does comply with our local LDP as it stands. Yes, there is the point about the no local interest, historical interest, but we are not deviating from the LDP at all if we approve this application today. I'm all for the heritage of an area, but in my opinion, I would tend to agree with officers' assessments that the need for houses across Wales, across Port Talbot and in the ward of Port Talbot at the moment outweighs that. We have I can't remember the name of it, they raised no objection. Historical, please someone help me out, historical.
The Morgan Gwent Archaeological Trust.
Correct. Very much. Thank you. We have no objection from them other than please record this building, which is no problem to record it. So I hear what the local members are saying. I hear what Councillor Percy is saying. And it's always a difficult thing with the planning application before you. It is always a matter of balance. And on balance, I am more than happy to go with the recommendations on this application today, and I do believe we have had sufficient information to make a decision on it today, and that's just a member of the committee giving my opinion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Addison. Councillor Freegard, I can see you were next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. Yeah, well, I would say that our historical society are absolutely up in arms about the loss of this building, and it goes back to how important it is on a local level. And that's what matters here, is our local level, and our historical society knew nothing about it until very recently, and they're absolutely up in arms about it. So I think we do need to consider what Councillor Percy said about the legal requirements. If no balance is there in the application for looking at the historical element of this building, then I would ask you, please reconsider this or refuse the application. Thank you.
Councillor Percy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to address some of the comments from Councillor Patterson, and I just to reiterate and stress really to members that my comments do relate to the application that is in front of us, and the comments that I'm making is that the application in front of members today does not contain sufficient information in order to weigh up the demand and need for housing and the development against the heritage value of the site. And therefore, I don't believe it complies with policy BE2 or TAN 24. So that was that's the key point for me. That's not looking at any other application. That's just what's in front of members today is my key issue. And just in relation to the comments around planning history, you know, the building has an extant use as office space. So although that there haven't been a flurry of planning applications from developers, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The building has an extant use and was in use as office space until relatively recently. So that's not really an issue in terms of the future of this building. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor, I see your hands up. I'm just going to go Councillor Patterson because I assume you're going to come back there to what Councillor Percy said.
No, Chair. Every person is entitled to their opinion. I've given my opinion, and you know, Councillor Percy and local members may feel differently, but no, I'm just going to leave it at that. Thanks.
Sorry, it's just your hand was up. That's fine. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on what had been said by Councillor Patterson. As a member of this committee, I am looking at only this application that is before us today and the information that's been supplied. In fact, I have no other information beyond what has been supplied, but I am not seeing the information I need to make that decision of balance between the historic building and the housing need. I'm not seeing the assessments I would need to say that the housing need outweighs the historic importance of the building and its possible use for housing as a building, as an existing building.
Councillor Phillips. Councillor Keogh, yeah, speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I deliberately kept quiet because being a former member of the Talbot ward for 18 years, and the thing is that, yeah, I had views on this when the planning application came forward when I was a councillor there. I agree with Sean. I have to agree with Sean because the historical importance of that building, as he said, he hasn't gone into its history and anything else, but there is a lot more involved than just that building, believe me. It goes back to the very origins of the town itself, to the construction of the harbour or the dock in 1837, and that building was built by the same family. You have to remember that behind that building was a railway station called Eagle Station. The platforms were still there up until that new development, Eagle Mews, took place back in the 90s. But because of its cladding that was put on the outside of that building back in the 70s or back maybe late 60s. But the thing is that, yeah, it's of historical importance, but we need that information. And if Sean would like to put forward a proposal that we defer the decision today until such. No,
sorry, you finish. I'll go to Gavin after this.
Sure.
Sorry, Gavin, would you like to start?
No, as far as I'm aware, Chair, and I may be wrong on this, but as Councillor Percy isn't a member of the planning committee,
yes,
he can't.
Yeah.
Oh, right, I didn't realise.
No, that's all right. I was just going to come on to that. No, you.
Well, then I'll put the proposal forward.
It's deferred.
To be deferred until such time
Okay,
as the relevant information that Sean has mentioned is brought forward into the report.
So Councillor Keogh has proposed that we defer this until we get extra information. Have we got a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Okay. Sorry, who was that then?
Councillor Phillips.
Councillor Phillips.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can't see him. Right. So we need to go to a vote on that then.
Yes. So what I'll do now, I'll go through the members who have been present for the meeting. Obviously, Councillor Keogh proposed and Councillor Phillips seconded. So I'll go through all of the names. There was 9 members in attendance in today's meeting. Oh, Chair, did you want to go to the hands first, to clear the hands?
Yeah, best. And
Councillor Davis has got had a hand up.
Councillor Davis. How's Davis?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down, but I'm in favour of deferring.
We'll do the vote in a second. Councillor Rahman, do you want to say anything before we go to the vote?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For clarification, can I ask what is the reason for deferment and what extra information are you going to be bringing back?
There's been a proposal.
Okay.
It's been seconded. Now we need a decision on it, and then councillors will have to give reasons.
So, okay, so Gavin just said now, we'll have the vote, and then if it's approved, we'll have the reasons that the officers take away then, before the next meeting.
Councillor Freegard.
Councillor Freegard, your hand up.
Chair, would it be possible if it was, if the committee did defer, could we include an assessment on the highways, please?
Would
No, there's been a proposal, it's been seconded.
Yeah.
So we need to go through.
We go through that, come through that later.
Because otherwise we'd be amending all the time.
Yeah,
Chair.
okay.
Councillor, I don't know if Councillor Bowen wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, only a quick one. If it is actually deferred, could we arrange a site visit? Because I don't think some of us members are quite
Again,
updated on what this building is.
We have to talk about that after. Let's get the vote, and then we can talk about that after. Okay.
Right, so I'll go through all the members that was in attendance today. So Chair, are you in favour or not favour of the deferment of the report?
I was present for the whole meeting.
Oh, sorry, are you present for the whole meeting?
I was present for the whole meeting,
yeah.
And I'm in favour of the deferment of the report.
Okay, then if we go to the Vice Chair, Councillor Jeff Jones, could you please confirm if you've been in attendance for the whole item and if you're voting in favour or not favour of the deferment? Councillor Jeff Jones?
Still on mute.
Sorry, yes. Yes, I have been present for the whole meeting and I agree with the deferment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then Councillor Tim Bowen, have you been present for the whole meeting and what are you voting?
Yes, I have been present and I go for the deferment.
Okay. Then Councillor Rosalind Davis, could you confirm if you've been present and how you're voting, please?
I have been present for the whole item and I'm in favour of the deferment.
Thank you. And then Councillor Carl Jordan, could you confirm if you've been present for the whole item and how you are voting?
Yes, good morning all. I can confirm I have been in attendance for the whole meeting and I'm in favour of the deferment.
Okay. Councillor Dennis Keogh, could you confirm if you've been present and how you are voting?
I've been present at the entire meeting and I'm in favour of the deferment.
Okay. Councillor Suzanne Paddison, could you confirm if you've been in attendance for the whole meeting and how you are voting, please?
Yes, I've been here the whole time and I'm against.
Okay. Councillor Ken Phillips, could you please confirm if you've been present for the whole meeting and how you are voting?
I can confirm I've been present for the whole meeting and I vote in favour of the deferment.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, Councillor Sarah Thomas, could you confirm you've been present for the whole meeting and how you are voting?
I have been present for the whole meeting and I support the deferment.
Okay, you just bear with me 1 second. So, Chair, I can confirm out of the 9 members that are in attendance in today's meeting, 8 have voted in favour of the deferment and 1 has voted against the deferment.
That's deferment's been passed.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of things brought up there which we need to sort before we move on to the next item. So what information would members like to see when this comes back? Gavin.
Councillor Tim Bowen.
Councillor Bowen.
Yeah, I just want to know if we can arrange some sort of a site visit, because I think some of us might not be up to standard on the actual building, or
Okay.
I just go down myself. I don't particularly mind.
Councillor Bowen, is that a motion for a site visit?
If possible, yes.
Proposing a site visit. We've got a seconder for that?
I'll second that. Councillor Thomas.
Okay,
Right.
so now we need to go on the vote for the site visit.
For the site visit. So, Councillor Tim Bowen, you've requested the site visit, so obviously you've requested that. Councillor Rosalind Davis.
I'm in favour of a site visit because I'm not familiar with the area myself.
Thank you. Chair, sorry, are you in favour of the site visit?
Yeah, in favour of the site visit.
Okay. Councillor Jeff Jones, you in favour of the site visit?
Yes, I'm in favour.
Councillor Carl Jordan?
Yes, also in favour of a site visit.
Councillor Dennis Keogh?
Yes, I'm in favour of a site visit.
Councillor Suzanne Paddison?
I know the area, but I will go to a site visit, yeah.
Councillor Ken Phillips?
Yes, I'm in favour of a site visit.
And Councillor Sarah Thomas?
I am indeed in favour.
So all 9 members are in favour of a site visit to the proposed sites. Okay, thank you.
So I can see Councillor Thomas got a hand up there. Thomas?
So I was going back to the previous proposal. If we could maybe have a bit more information, perhaps from Councillor Percy, about the history of the site. I realise that we have been provided a lot of information, but it feels a bit like local people don't agree with the Historical and Archaeological Society on this. And if he's done the research, perhaps we could have that sent over so we can all understand why this site is of such heritage importance.
Yeah, that can be included in the report if you're happy, Councillor Percy.
Chair, if I can come in at this point, perhaps I can assist members in perhaps some of the wording of how the justification of the deferment. It's not necessarily for me to put forward what I know about the building, what I believe needs to happen in order to consider this application fully and thoroughly, is that a heritage impact assessment is undertaken, which is detailed in TAN 24, and that a revised officer's report comes back to members taking into account the heritage impact assessment. So that would be wording to that effect is what I think needs to take place. And I will, of course, when that heritage impact assessment is undertaken by whoever, I am quite happy to contribute information that I have to that, but I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to provide that information to members in that way.
Can I come back in? Thank you, Councillor Percy. So I would propose then that we have a heritage impact assessment, and if Councillor Percy wishes to contribute to that, that would be excellent.
So you,
Councillor Thomas. So what's the reasons for the heritage impact assessment?
What is the reason for the heritage impact?
So, in order for us to, like, lots of people present feel that we don't have enough information about the heritage side of this building, and the fact that if we do allow it to be demolished, then obviously we can't put it back. So if we could have that assessment into that so that we can make sure that we are making the right decision.
Councillor Phillips, I'll let you speak first before we go to any kind of vote here.
Yeah, I was just going to say more or less exactly what Councillor Thomas has said. We need that heritage impact assessment in order to make the decision on the balance of whether the existing building should be demolished. But I think we also need a detailed assessment of whether from the developer or from officers or whatever, of the possible use of the existing building for residential purposes. I don't feel that we've got that at the moment.
Yeah, come in.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is that in my discussions with local businessmen, is that an offer was made on that site to the now owners of it, to look at the different uses to keep the building, but it was refused. It was serious money. It was refused.
Okay.
So can I just ask, are there, apart from the heritage impact assessment to look at the heritage of the building itself, are there any other reasons why effectively councillors wanted to defer?
So just to confirm, so apart from the heritage assessment to ensure that it complies with TAN 24, was there any other reasons that they wanted to defer today?
I think if before that decision is made, we have to go to the nth degree, right, and thoroughly investigate it before we make a decision. And if we make the decision, it's the right decision.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, it's not just the impact, not just the heritage impact assessment in terms of the history of the building, but also the lack of information on the possible use of the building as it stands and development of the building without demolition that we are lacking.
So that's something, correct me wrong, we can't look at other possible uses, can we? No. What it is, the thing is, we can't look at other possible uses. What we can look at is what the existing use is and what the proposed use on the plan application is. We can't go down the road of looking at, it could be this, it could be that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but as part of the submission we already had, they have declared that it is non-viable to use the existing building for residential use, but they haven't provided any sort of, they have provided scant justification for that assertion. If we are going to make a decision to demolish the building on the basis that they claim it is not viable to use the existing building for residential use, surely we need an assessment to see that it is not viable to use the building for residential use.
Yeah, it's still, it has to be based on what the current application is.
No, it's just speaking legally, it still needs to be based on what the current application is.
Yeah, do you mind if I perhaps
that is part of the current
something?
application though, that declaration that it's not viable is part of the application.
Chris, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of like give an overarching view on it, I think is what you're after is further information on the need and justification for the development of this location that in the developer's opinion would outweigh the heritage importance of the site and justify the demolition. So I think if you kind of round it up in that kind of language, I think asking them to specifically give you details about why they cannot do certain things with the building, you know, you're going to be having quite precise responses back. So I think it's kind of a general further information regarding the need and justification for the development of this location and why they consider that outweighs the heritage importance of the site and thereby would justify its demolition. So I think then they would obviously come back with a statement adding further information on that regard, both on the need and in relation to the actual site and the historic importance of the building itself.
Thank you, Chris. Kerry, your hand was up. Has Chris covered it, is he?
Yeah, Chris has made the exact point I was going to make. I think the key phrase is members are asking for a heritage impact assessment, ultimately to provide the reasons why the development outweighs the historic importance of the building. I think that's the key phrase that has to be captured, I think.
Okay. So if you got what Kerry said there, Chris, your hand's still up. Do you want to come back?
No, sorry.
So any members of the planning committee like to propose that?
I don't think
we're ready to propose. It's been done, Chair, but those are the
All right,
reasons.
okay, so it's been done.
That's
Sorry, that's me, I got off. This is
it's just been worded differently.
okay, so the officers know what we're doing. We've got the site visit, will be arranged. You can receive details of that. I can move on to the next item on the agenda. So it's delegated decisions. To see that on your agenda. Item 6. So they just been noted there. Item 7 in the agenda is urgent items. I have no urgent items. That concludes today's planning meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.